Hello, welcome to the GW Books Club, where me and my good friend Stu from the Miniature Realms YouTube channel have been reading through the original fiction published by Games Workshop between 1989 and 1991. This time, we're talking about Krokodil Tears, the second novel set in the dark future setting, written by Kim Newman under the pen name Jack Yeovil. This is also the second part of the Demon Download cycle, a wild ride with Mad Max, Cthulhu, dystopian, cyber-goth, Blade Runner-esque influences, and it doesn't stop delivering horrors and action. It is a really interesting read, and before we talk about it, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the story. The Psychopomps gang member, Jessamine Bonney, better known as Jazzbo, wakes up alone in the aftermath of a massacre in the town of Spanish Fork. An ancient, otherworldly being inhabiting the human body of a Josephite preacher called Seth Nukian had beaten Jazzbo to a pulp and unleashed a demonic reckoning as part of his plan to usher in the apocalypse. Beaten but not broken, Jazzbo wanders the wasteland of Middle America, encountering foes and friends. At the Cat's Motel, she discovers the horrific secret of a mad son obsessed with his dead mother sitting in the window. In the town of Dead Rat, she receives treatment for her wounds from an old friend, as well as a whole suite of biotechnological upgrades that almost make her more machine than woman. It's not long before the dangerous agents working on behalf of Elder Seth Nukian track Jazzbo down, though, intent on finishing the job that he had started at Spanish Fork. A massive squad of sanctioned ops, bounty hunters, and soldiers failed to do that when they all get completely destroyed in an assault on Dead Rat. Then, an escaped mass murderer is brought in to try and finish the job as well, but he has an altogether different interaction with Jazzbo. Finally, Jazzbo teams up with the medicine man called Hawk That Settles, who has foreseen a vision of her future, one that ties her closely to the crocodile spirit that inhabits the moon. Together, they begin training to prevent the coming of the end of the world. All the while, Elder Seth Nukian tries to hasten it by summoning a dark god from another universe to finally take Jazzbo out before she ascends and becomes Crocodile. Stu, we are together again for the GW Books Club. We're talking about another Jack Yeovil novel. This is Krokodil Tears, part of the Dark Future Demon Download cycle. So I guess let's just start with, how did you feel overall? Did you enjoy it?
Yes, yeah, it was good. It's a good story. It's a Jack Yeovil book, and it's a Dark Future book. So that's a pretty good combination. And as much as we love his Genevieve stuff, I think he's just made for this, really. Yeah. He's made for this world. And he had the freedom to take it in his own little direction, because there wasn't much in the way of anything solid that he could break any rules with, really. And I think he's did a really good job of it. Yeah. Like I said before, he reminds me, the way he writes and the way he writes Dark Future definitely reminds me of reading a Stephen King novel. He has a way that he can make things instantly feel recognizable at home, like you're watching an 80s, 90s TV film, that kind of thing. It's just something instantly familiar about it, and he's very at ease, and it makes it really readable and quite good at making you want to turn to the next page, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think he is made for this. So Kim Newman, the author who writes as Jack Yeovil, because he loves other media, he loves films, he loves music, and he wants to bring all that in. And that grounds this dark future universe. Obviously, it dates it as well, because it's a specific time. It's the 90s. When this came out, that was the future. So obviously now we're looking back and we can sort of, you get that dated feel. But there's so many references to personalities, political people, celebrities, movies, all of this sort of stuff peppered throughout the text. And he has so much fun with just subverting like real history and kind of say, this person who you might know as a famous sort of satirical comedian, well, in the Dark Future universe, he's become a very much a institutionalized kind of supports the government sort of character. So there's a real fun vibe to the whole thing. And that's before
Yes.
you even get to like the story, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's loads of, I mean, we noticed them in the previous stories. I think we talked about in the past about with Oliver North, obviously mentioned again.
Sure.
That's something I was vaguely familiar with because I'm a child of the 80s and 90s, so I'd kind of watched the news a bit, and it was okay. And then there's like Ken Dodd was brought up again, and it
Yes.
becomes a famous musical artist. There's lots of, and it's just really good fun. So I think I recognised all the names, and there will be the odd bit where I'm not quite sure of the reference, but most of it I get. I'm just about old enough to kind of get all of those references, and I think it's really, really good fun. And he's clearly having a pop and joke at things. Poor old Neil Gaiman.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting one.
I'm guessing it's fun. I'm going to assume it's a good-natured kind of.
I think it must have been at the time. Yeah, I mean, obviously, right as of recording, there's certain events taking place.
I wouldn't go.
Neil Gaiman's
I thought I wouldn't mention what he talked about.
Sure, it's just very interesting to see that his name. Obviously, he's very a popular writer, comic book writer and author.
A lot bigger now as well. So.
Even bigger now, yeah. So it's just a great. It is one of those things of you can see Newman just sort of pulling from the things he's enjoying or he's seeing what's out there and turning it on its head and kind of, that's the kind of, it's maybe a simple sort of satirical joke and he does it a lot, but it works almost every time. And I'm the same. I don't recognize probably even half of the references, but you take the Ollie North one, for instance. So in the Dark Future universe, he's the president and he's leading the country. Obviously, in our world, he was involved in a scandal and sort of disgraced. And there's a lot of disgraced politicians, certainly right-wing politicians for many of them as well, who are in positions of power in the dark future because it has gone down a sort of more authoritarian, more dystopian route, I think. So
all politicians you wouldn't expect to be there. I think the Prime Minister is Ian Paisley in the UK, isn't it? Which is another would be an interesting situation you could ever get to become.
So all of that fun stuff, that's just like extra moments of sort of comedy or world building. I think that really gives it this kind of propulsive quality. There are these sort of news breaks throughout, and you sort of get that. But in terms of the actual sort of main story, we're following this character Jazbo, who we were introduced to in one of the shorts that we'd already read in the Route 666 collection. And we got a bit of background to her as she was a member of the Psychopomps. She's a dangerous sort of teenage criminal. At the end of the story where we first encountered her, she kind of got, almost destroyed, decimated by the religious fanatic elder Seth, who is in communion with demons. Like there's kind of a certain aspect of chaos to this character, and we kind of had been left with Jazbo seeming to be dead, but in this story she's not. She picks herself up and then she sort of goes on a voyage of self-discovery, I suppose, doesn't she?
Yeah, but fixing up first and then sort of self-discovery. I think it's done quite well. The book is split into five parts.
Sure,
and each part is almost her evolving or growing or getting well in some ways and then sort of becoming something else. And I think that's split quite nicely. I think it works really well. And it's nice to see that character change. You don't spend an awful lot of time with the character in each of those areas. So I suppose there would, not that there has been, but there would be room for lots of other stories to be told within each of those time periods of her development if you wanted to. But again, it's the brevity of a movie, isn't it?
It is. The pace is so fast. And like you say, those 5 chapters, I mean, there's then subsections within all of those, but each one of those different sections, those 5 sort of different eras, if you like, as Jazbo evolves over a couple of years, they each have their own name, and they are different names or identities, I suppose, for the Jazbo character. So she starts off as Jazbo, and then becomes the Sand Rat, and then Jessamine, which is her birth name, and then She's Frankenstein's daughter because she's sort of been modded, and then we get to Crocodile at the very end. So like those are the different evolutions of this character as we go. I think I really liked that, and that gave it the sort of forward momentum. And we do learn a lot about her and her background. Actually, there's almost an extra section which starts the book, which is her police file, like her rap sheet from when she was a sort of teenager.
Yeah, it's a kind of a prologue, isn't it?
Yeah, and I thought that was a really, really good way of introducing this character. It kind of shows us that, yes, she's dangerous. Yes, she's a gang member. So it's the character we'd met in the short story. It also gives some hints to some of her kind of tragic backstory and how she's ended up being that person. There's also another fun reference in there. You get like the editor, David Pringle, is name checked as being a member of the press corps. So there's things like that. Kim Newman he name checks himself later on
as a film director.
It's
cool. It's cool.
Which is great fun. And he talks about who's going to play one of the characters. Is it going to be Steve Martin or Jeremy Irons? And then later on you find out that it was Steve Martin who played the character. So there's a lot of fun gags like that.
So much fun doing it. It's good.
But this story is essentially how we get from Jazbo, the psychopomp who has been defeated and lost her status in the gang, to Crocodile, this kind of sort of prophesied warrior who is going to help bring the battle to this demon that is Elder Seth and decide the fate of the world, essentially. And we kind of get the prophecy that this is going to happen at some point. We know now that it was going to be Y2K. That was going to be where the sort of broader cycle ends. But we're kind of finding out how Jazbo becomes this fabled warrior who we're going to meet. I mean, how did you feel about the Jazbo character in her many different iterations?
I don't know. There's not a huge amount of depth, though there is some detail, if that makes sense. So a lot of it's very visual.
Right.
Because I think he describes very well. And again, I think that leans into his movie star writing. You feel like, I've said this many times before in these discussions, that you feel like you're reading a movie, which for a short novel, I think it's a very strong thing. And for something like this kind of style of story, it's kind of what you need, really. You don't want to be trying to go too in depth and emotional with this. You kind of want to read a movie. That's what it's about. So I think it works for that. But I suppose you get to the end of it and you don't really know anything about her. You probably learn more about her from that prologue. Sure. When you learn some sympathy for her from her broken childhood, essentially, and the start she had. Aside from that, you don't learn an awful lot. It's just little snippets and little shots and things. So I think I like her, but I suppose do we really know much about her? Not really.
I agree, and I kind of wrestled with this after reading the book, because I really enjoyed her arc through the book and how she does kind of take off these layers of character and kind of change into, because she starts, the character we'd seen previously was hot-headed and aggressive, this quite boisterous, dangerous gang member. She very quickly sort of evolves from that into a much more kind of mature, she's been humbled in this fight that she's had with Elder Seth. She's lost her gang. She loses her friends in the gang, her gang mates. And then there's various encounters that we'll get into that sort of show her other sides of humanity, other sides of inhumanity in different ways as well, like the technological stuff. And then move her to a place where she's a bit more detached from humanity. Yeah. Is still trying to find it. And I was kind of wrestling after reading the book with, well, did I feel like this was a book about Jazbo or not? Because, like you say, you don't really get super deep internal monologues. There's a lot of the sort of classic cinematic adage of action is character. So things that one does and action scenes can show you the character. There's loads of action scenes in the book. And I think we get Jazbo's character through that, and we see how she changes through that. whether or not we get like it's not a deep meditation on who she is. It's kind of I don't want to say a shallow meditation on who she is, but it's not as deep as you might have expected.
I think her character is probably used as a tool to explain the world.
Sure. Yes.
So you have the scenes with her, and each scene is about something, quite often about her physicality. So when she's injured, when she's the sand rat, when she's fixed up. So it's all about almost it's telling you a little story about the world is this violent. The world has these areas you can that are desolate. It's all everything's to do with this is what the world is like. When she goes back to the motel and has a shower, it's going to cost her money, and meets Herman and all these kind of there's different tales around the world, and in between all of these are these little snippets, like kind of news articles or something like that, which tells you even more about the world. So it does feel like the book, in many ways, is just kind of really building up this quite strong picture of what it's like to live in this world, what kind of lifestyle, what kind of people live there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think her character is used to embellish that even more, and build that narrative towards that kind of final moment of jeopardy, with the big bads, which are the demons and Elder Seth and all the plans that him and his people have, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair shout. I mean, actually, just thinking about the motel, I suppose what's interesting is if you look at this book in contrast to the previous Jack Yeovil or Kim Newman Dark Future novel, so Demon Download, the start of this cycle of stories, that follows Trooper Nathan Stack for a good amount of the book. We probably don't know any more about him than we do about Jazbo. And in fact, because we get more backstory for Jazbo over the course of the novel, we probably do know more about her. So I think I probably don't see it as a problem. It's almost a stylistic choice. But yeah, comparing the motel piece between those two books, in Demon Download, Stack goes to stay in a motel. He goes to sleep, and he basically keeps his badge and his gun underneath his pillow, and he knows to leave a wallet full of cash on the table, the chest of drawers, because he knows that's going to get stolen, and if they don't find something, they will attack him.
Yes.
And because they find something, they just let him sleep, and that's fine. And that's kind of talks to his streetwise approach. We get a very different motel sequence in this book, where it essentially is the movie Psycho, right? The Hitchcock movie. So Jazbo checks in, and Herman Katz is the motel owner, and he's managing it, and his mum lives in the house up on the hill. Obviously, it turns out that he tries to kill her whilst she's in the shower, but because she's a very competent fighter, she's not taken by surprise, and she beats him, but she doesn't kill him. And then she goes into the house and finds the mother, and then sort of, that almost has a vision. So we get like a connection to the sort of eldritch aspect of things, because she's tied to Elder Seth now. But that, on the one hand, it's a very brazen homage to Psycho. It kind of speaks to this, I'm going to take real world stuff and I'm going to give it a different slant. So that's the same as the politicians. He's doing that now with pop culture and just giving it a different slant. In this case, Janet Leigh is able to fight Norman Bates because she's a gang member, and then the story goes in a different direction. So I thought that was quite fun.
Yeah, he just has fun with it all the way through, and it's a really successful way of telling the story, isn't it? And he uses it. So I mean, you talk about not knowing much about Nathan Stack's background, but you don't need to, because he's every sheriff or trooper that you've ever seen on the television. And the same with nearly every one of his characters. You don't need too much of an in-depth kind of description about their background, because you've seen them in hundreds of movies, and that's the strength of it. So he means that you can have more fun spending time giving you different kinds of details, like the leaving the cash out kind of thing. This is all stuff that you would see visually, and it feels visual. It feels, you just feel at home reading it. It's very clever, very powerful, because it does it all for you, and it means the story flows. Rather than you wonder. I don't find myself at any point wondering why characters are making certain decisions. They tend to just make sense. And that's definitely what I enjoy about his books, especially his style of book. But as I said before, I'm such a huge fan of Stephen King style writing, and it's so much of this just makes me think of there's little elements all the way through. It just makes me think of so many of his books.
I've not read too much Stephen King, so I'm not able to draw that same comparison. But I can definitely imagine it. I know with the Dark Tower how he likes to draw on all these different bits of pop culture and bring them
Dark
into
Tower's so good. We should do
right.
the Dark Tower, but we won't get there. You'd love it. You'd love it. But anyway, we won't go.
Yeah, but so once we get through the motel, and actually one of the important things about that motel sequence is that Jasbo could kill Herman Katz. She could take him out. He's tried to kill her, but she decides not to. You don't really interrogate that in this sequence, but I think it already speaks to her having changed since she was.
I think that's probably why it's there. I think that's. I mean, the reason she's got this connection with Seth is because she tried on his glasses.
Yeah, his sunglasses, his magic sunglasses.
And I think that surviving that near-death experience on the road to his beating, and she should have died. You know, there was a lot wrong with her at the beginning of the story. I think you're right. I think that right from the beginning, she has changed, and that moment of losing all of her friends, all of her gang mates, her new family. So violent, horrible family, but it's probably more of a real family compared to the upbringing she had from her father.
Yeah,
losing all of that and that near-death experience has changed her, and that's probably the first time you see that. Yeah, well, she's matured now. She has a new purpose, a new path, and she's probably not fully aware of what that is at that stage. And she learns that later on.
Yeah,
but I think that's the first signs you see that she's moved on. She's more serious now. There's something a bit more kind of cold and calculating, but at the same time, that's
a really good point.
With his own life.
Yeah, I like that, because you're right. There is, and it's even alluded to actually in the book, where she almost doesn't know why she took the sunglasses and why she wanted to wear them, and obviously we know that they are magic, and it sounds goofy, but it works so well in this universe. They are this sort of magic dark artifact, and she was almost compelled, almost like the One Ring maybe is what's done it. But it has also set her on a path. Like, that is what caused Elder Seth to want to kill her and to make an example of her. Because he didn't succeed in doing that, she is now on this new pathway to becoming Crocodile, who will play a major role in some future event. So she's entering this destiny that she's got.
Yeah.
She's moved from being almost the anonymous gang member to being someone who's important in a like a metaphysical kind of world-ending kind of way.
Yes. Yeah. It's because we start to cut to Elder Seth and Jirok as well, and they're starting to she's got to be dealt with now as well. So you see that sort of subplot going on the whole time. You see her growing and changing. You know that these two kind of sides of this big battle are moving towards the moment, as you know that they're searching for her and trying to basically put a hit out on her to start with, and it doesn't exactly go well. But it's nice to see that kind of.
Let's explore that, because I think that this was really fun. So like you say, Durok is the kind of Elder Seth's right-hand man in this new Josephite sort of religious super state that they're building. And they are, because Elder Seth needs this girl to be killed, Durok is basically any means necessary. So one of the routes he takes is to employ a real high-end bounty hunter who is, I mean, as a character, I enjoyed a lot. He's a super flashy, kind of the worst sort of 80s yuppie kind of, almost Patrick Bateman, American Psycho kind of vibes of just being really over the top. Low, like all of the lingo, everything's snaz because it's good and stuff like that. He's so unlikable, and he's the one that Duroc employs to take out Jasbo. And then when that moment comes, so she's been augmented, so she's gone to see an old doctor
Yep.
friend of hers who's given her a complete overhaul. He's given her like a titanium skull. He's given her a new eye implant. She's got like robotic arms and all this sort of stuff. And in this town, so it's called Dead Rat, which, that's great. Um, a whole army of bounty hunters comes to take her out. And the sequence, I don't know how you felt about it, but I thought the sequence where this happens was absolutely brilliant. It was
Yes. Yeah, it's fantastic.
so much fun, so intense. Again, very cinematic, very visual. But essentially, there's something like 300 bounty hunters have come into this town, and they are just all guns blazing, no mercy. They're taking out civilians, they're taking out anybody that they come across just to get to Jasbo. And the snaz guy, the slick bounty hunter, is sat in his car looking at the numbers, just watching the numbers go down. And he's got the number of bounty hunters and the number of civilians. And over the course of however many pages, we keep coming back to the numbers as they're ticking down and ticking down and ticking down. It's
Yeah.
such a great like ticking clock to the scene.
Yeah.
It's really good.
I love it. You can feel it. It's ticking down towards zero, and he knows that he's the only one left. It reminds me a little bit of Aliens, when you've got the terrible officer who's in the command ATV, and you can see the kind of the cameras going off one by one as he realizes that all of his Marines are being killed. And his character's not like that at all. His character's just a match, but there's that moment of seeing people's ammunition counts going down, seeing them running out, and the panic of one by one, we're not going to win this. We are overpowered here. We are outmatched. And I really like that.
Yeah, and Jasbo kind of she almost like is the Terminator in that sequence. I mean, there's one bit when and it's great because, and this is what I mean about the sort of action is character stuff. We see that she is smart, that she's really like tactical. She's using her opponent's strengths against them. She manages to get into an armored car in order to take out one of the controllers. When it comes to the very end of this sequence, so the numbers have ticked all the way down to basically 1 and 1 because there's only the snaz guy and Jasbo left, and he's in his completely armored car where he's kind of put up all the shields around it, and all of the armor comes down, and thrown into the passenger seat is the severed hand of his deputy that Jasbo has used to unlock the car from the outside. And it's just a great ending. Yeah. And because it is this kind of like, you see a lot of that sequence from the perspective of the bounty hunters, and she's a force of nature. It's almost like in a horror movie when there's the killer out and about, and you're just seeing the effects, like you say, Aliens, where you're seeing from the Marines' perspective, these aliens are just devastating everybody, and that's where the
pure late 80s, early 90s movie. That whole hand chucked on there. It's like you mentioned Terminator. In fact, her doctor, Simon Threadneedle, is his name. Simon. Threadneedle.
That's right. Yeah.
So he's augmented as well. So he was here at this town, and he's literally just metal at the end, doesn't he? Because he got caught in a fire, so he's melted down basically to the Terminator.
Yeah, the endoskeleton. Yeah, completely.
So it's just brilliant. It was so visual, and you can picture it so well. It just the way you're talking about it feels like you've pictured it in exactly the same way as I have as well. So it's good.
There's a danger here, right? Because if you're doing this section is Psycho, but in the Dark Future universe, this section is like the Terminator, maybe in the Dark Future universe. It could feel like it's these disconnected sort of pastiches, and it could feel really, I don't know, it might not come together, but he somehow manages to make it all work. And I think because this is because the whole universe of Dark Future is this kind of pop culture, it just revels in it. It loves it. It wants to be all the action tropes. It wants to bring all the best bits of 80s cinema and writing. It kind of rises above all of the parts that he's borrowed. I mean, and just to get into some of the even more brazen kind of pop culture stuff that we get, and I love this. So we're introduced in some of the news sections to there's been a serial killer operating across America who's taken out hundreds and hundreds of people over a number of years, called the Tasmanian Devil. And then later on, we find out that the Tasmanian Devil is actually an economic advisor to President North. And this guy has just been, he's a terrifying mass murderer, a horrible, evil person. He is put into prison, maximum security wing, and we are introduced to him there. And first of all, he is extremely polite and very genial and very nice, a very amiable character, which I thought was a really fun, just to juxtapose being the nicest guy at the same time as being just pure evil. But some of his inmates,
of the Lamb's kind of Clarice moment, isn't it? It's almost
taken to the extreme. And then some of the other cellmates that he's got include Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers. And they literally name check these characters. And at first, it felt like, okay, so that's just a gag. That's just a joke. But then there's a riot later on in the prison, and we actually get like action scenes featuring Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees in this riot. So they're taking out prisoners, and they're very in character. They're doing exactly what Michael Myers would do if he was in a prison full of guards, and exactly what Jason Voorhees would do in a prison full of guards. So I thought that was just fantastic. Yeah. It was. I laughed out loud at some of that stuff.
Yeah, it was very entertaining, and it's such a nice little nod to like, it just fits, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it's with the humor, but also fits with what world could this reality really exist in? How crazy! Well, these guys fit exactly in this world. Almost fits so well that they are kept in the same prison wing, because there's clearly a lot of people like this in this world.
But I love so first of all, canonically, the author, Kim Newman, exists in the universe, as well as the characters, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, a number of others as well. I think there's a couple of brains in jars that are mentioned as well. I think one of them might be Krueger, as in Freddy Krueger, potentially.
Yeah, I think they said that, yeah.
Yeah, so there's all these characters all exist together. And they're all left on the table as well, so they survive, which is great. Even though they both should have died, but Jason in particular gets a death scene, and then a classic Jason Voorhees, no, he's not dead at all, sort of moment. But yeah, all of that, and that was just for fun, but it adds to the world building. It adds so much, and it's just a good diversion. But the reality, the real reason we're there is because we get introduced to Ottokar Proctor, who is the Tasmanian Devil, so this character, and we basically know he is this ultimate evil. He's terrifying. He seems really nice. He's very logical, very rational, but he's also completely criminally insane. He gets recruited by Duroc when the Snaz bounty hunter has failed. So he's the next guy who's sent to take out Jasbo. And that builds up then to a very exciting kind of sequence, I think, where we know he's coming and Jasbo doesn't know he's on the way.
Yeah, and I think, we might be jumping ahead, but I think when he does catch up with her, it feels to me like the first time we feel some jeopardy for her.
Yeah.
Because with a story that they're going to make it or win at the end. It's that's the way stories work. Your main characters tend to be but that fight with him, the fight they had, as much as I knew she must win, there were points where you're thinking, well, how? Because he's clearly outmatching her in many ways here, even though you wouldn't expect it. That's good. In fact, it almost felt like there was more jeopardy fighting him than there was the big bad up to the end, which no doubt we'll come on to. But I thought it was really well done. And I don't always like you said this before, I don't always like long fight scenes in books, because it can be a little bit, but they weren't too long, and it was a good read, that section. I think it was enough to keep you gripped, wondering how was she going to get through this,
Mm.
and what was going to happen? But it didn't go on for too long. But
Yeah,
good character, and he's
yeah,
still around, I think. So
he is still around. Yeah, well,
hopefully he'll come
yeah,
back.
because I think so. You know, he's Dr. Ottiker Proctor, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's also quite a fun name because
Yeah,
Ottiker is a great name anyway. But yeah, he is a really fun character, and he does survive. He's still alive at the end of the book. I'm really excited because I want to see him again. I think he's a brilliant villain because he's a likable, like hateable villain simultaneously, which is quite hard to do,
yes,
I think. So yeah, he's really good, and he, like you say, he does bring a level of tension both to that fight that he has with Jasbo because he's essentially winning most of that fight sequence. And then there's another character who Jasbo has teamed up with in the novel, who is Hawk that Settles. So he's
yes,
a Native American character, First Nation people character who is he basically has been sent by the medicine man because he's seen this vision. He knows that there are going to be these champions essentially who are going to come together to help save the world, and he knows he needs to be in a certain place to be part of that. And for him, it is about helping Jasbo become Crocodile essentially, and sort of
yes, yeah,
develop her into herself. And there's a really interesting, I suppose, the perspective on Hawk that Settles character and role is very interesting. But just before getting to that, I was just going to say that there's a scene later on where, because the Tasmanian Devil Proctor has been defeated by Jasbo, it breaks his mind essentially, and he just becomes not catatonic, but just completely blank essentially, and very docile, and just will do whatever you tell him, almost childlike in a way. So he just hangs out after that, even though he had come with the intention of killing Jasbo and almost did. She lets him live in the same way she let Herman Katz live. And then he's just this guy who's hanging around with Jasbo and Hawk that Settles whilst they wait for their fate to catch up with them. And then there's this sequence later on where slowly Proctor starts to become aware of who he is again. And it's
yeah,
only a short sequence. Hawk that Settles is with him when this is happening. And it's just the tension to it, I thought, was magnificent. Because we
yeah,
know Proctor's coming back. And it always felt like this is a dangerous thing to do, but they just sort of did it. But now we know he's finding himself again, and he's gonna want to kill everybody because that's what he does. So there was a real tension to that I really liked.
yeah. I think you're right. I think you that moment where you feel, well, that that's it. He's defeated now. It's like Silence of the Lambs locked up. He must be safe. It's the end of Seven when he's in his shackles, but
Yeah.
we're going to take him to the desert anyway. It will be fine.
Yeah.
It's that kind of moment, isn't it, where you think he's still dangerous. You should have finished him. And yeah, you're right. It was well done, very well done, and I'm glad he's still alive to hopefully come back.
Yeah, because
I feel like he might.
I feel like he might. Yeah, I think there's a reason. Jasbo kept him alive, and I think there's a reason Kim Newman kept him alive as well.
Yeah,
But there's just a nice little quirk to his character as well, because his nickname is the Tasmanian Devil, and he sort of sees himself as a member of the Looney Tunes almost. So when he's in this sort of childlike state, he's just whittling everything he can find, just spending all his time whittling little Looney Tune characters. And at one point, he's imagining all of these characters, your Bugs Bunnies and stuff, running around and playing around in the room with him. And there's a box that's still got the Tasmanian Devil secured inside. And then at one point, this box, it jumps, it rumbles, whatever's inside it wants to get out. And I just thought that was a really cool way of expressing Proctor is still in there. He's just locked in this box for now, but he's coming. So yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I've completely forgotten about the Tasmanian Devil as well until I reread this. It was something that was around when I was at school.
Sure, yeah.
And many a bad tattoo as well that was fashionable in the early 90s. I don't have a Tasmanian Devil tattoo.
I mean, what did you think about Hawk That Settles then? So as a character, quite an interesting role to play.
Mm.
We get a lot of him and a lot of his internal monologue as he sort of thinks about the situation and thinks about his position in the story. Did you have any sort of feelings about him?
I think it was interesting character. Clearly there to be that kind of that guide, that typical kind of, whether it's the martial art film where he's the training sensei, is that it feels that role, spiritual guidance as well, gives that kind of connection, I suppose, to why she becomes the tool that she is to counter the evil, I suppose. Rather than it just happen, rather than she just becomes possessed, then it kind of gives a little bit more roundness to the story. I don't know. It's quite interesting. We get his thoughts a little bit more, and that almost that he knows that his job is just there to support her. So that's a little bit sad. Obviously, he's a romantic interest with them as well. Yeah, I do quite like the character. I think there's room there to learn more about that, about him as a character. And I think he'll be back as well. In fact, I think there's even a little footnote saying that learn more about their adventures. A few little bits that are amusing, like that they're all named after the first thing they see. So he's obviously Hawk That Settles, but his poor father was called Two Dogs Dying. It makes you wonder how many other bad names there could have, if you're caught in the wrong situation when you were born. But I don't know whether, I don't know. It's funny, but then also maybe a little bit insensitive at the same time. That I don't know, and I think it's probably meant in a really just trying to be funny, but not realizing actually when you're playing around with naming convention and you turn it into a joke. Actually, is that all right? But
I wondered about this because
so much taking the mick out of everything.
Yeah,
every culture almost, because it's, you know, the biggest joke is made out of Western culture and how bad it is and how greedy it is. So, I think that it's probably all done very innocently, but yeah, some of those things that are gags, you do think maybe that shouldn't be a gag, but it's probably just modern day. We're looking at it and thinking they probably wouldn't write that now. But in 89, 90, that was probably okay. But
I mean, I think it's interesting because what you get from Hawk That Settles' story and sort of his thoughts about things. So he's exploring his society and how his people have been exploited in the Dark Future universe very much as they have been in the real world, and what has happened to them, and how, you know, settlers have taken their land and forced them into certain areas and then affected their prospects essentially. And there's problems with drink, and his father is a drunk and an alcoholic and things like that. And that then sort of gives Hawk That Settles this kind of feeling of, you know, obviously he's sad about that and what that means for him and what he can achieve and do in this world. Yeah. And he's also very aware of his own role in Crocodile's story and Jasbo's story. So he knows that he's the spirit guide essentially, and he's not 100% comfortable with that. He doesn't just want to be there to be the spirit guide, to be the person who has all the exposition about this, you know, crocodile and what the crocodile motif that runs through this book is all about. He wants to be his own person and have his own story. And I think that is really interesting. That just adding that extra depth to him as a character. Is it completely successful? I don't know that it is, because even though he doesn't want to just play that role, he mostly does just play that role. So pointing out, you know, just saying, oh, well, this is an issue, isn't it? Doesn't absolve you of perpetuating that issue. But I do think there is something interesting in exploring it at all.
Well, maybe Kim Newman is trying to make a point.
I think so.
Because what you've described is the way indigenous people are treated in so many different countries. That what you described about being forced out, poverty, alcoholism, you could be describing New Zealand, Australia. It could be it's the same story anywhere the white man's gone, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of that, is that you know, want to be my own man, have my own thing. But all I have to be really is the pin-up guide for this this white girl who's she has to be the main star of the story. So maybe there's a big kind of bit of a dig at, actually.
I think there is. Yeah, I think there is. Because I also think that a very fine point is put on that, because Proctor, when he first turns up and he encounters Hawk, he calls him Tonto, as in the he's insulting,
racist,
movie insulting
racist.
and racist, absolutely. And
you would have seen that kind of thing in films at that time as well. That would be very, very common way of portraying that kind of abuse or
this belittling, absolutely. And so, but we know Proctor is evil. He is explicitly in the text very evil as a person, and that's how he treats him. And then when he's broken and becomes this sort of docile character, he doesn't do that. And then in those moments that I alluded to before, of when he remembers who he is really and this horrible person he is, it's calling Hawk Tonto that's the final moment of realization that Proctor is back. And I think it's a really effective way. It's a dramatic moment of, oh God, he's back, and he's, the terrible guy's back, and he's going to cause a lot of damage. He's dangerous. Hawk's in trouble here. And you do it through the use of that abusive kind of, belittling name. I think there is something really smart and effective about that. I think you're right. I think Newman is trying to make a point and explore that point. There's maybe it leans a little bit too far towards still using Hawk to do the exposition, to do the sort of magical, there's a spirit in the moon and it's going to inhabit you, Jasbo, when the time comes, and then you're going to become a great warrior who fights evil. Still a bit too much of that, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. It's difficult to know where that kind of drawing attention to it and repeating the same problem by drawing attention. But it's interesting. It's interesting, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, there's more tied to that as well, with the sort of ultimate big bad that we end up fighting, or Jasbo ends up fighting at the end of the story when she becomes Crocodile. So the prophecy. And I think we'll loop back around to the prophecy, because we can do some speculation, because there's a number of characters who are name checked in this prophecy. Yes, one of them is Jasbo, and she's going to be this prophesied character, and she will become Crocodile. And Crocodile is essentially the spirit that lives in the moon, in the sort of shape of the crescent moon is kind of the crocodile curled around, and that will merge with Jasbo, and she'll have the power to fight this creature or ancient one that Elder Seth summons through a great ritual that takes place in the Josephite sort of HQ, where he kills all of his lieutenants and he summons forth something called the Gibonese. I'm going to try it again.
I'm glad you'll go for it.
Gibonenose. I think that's right. And this is essentially, it's kind of a Cthulhu-esque space god, right? An ancient, unknown, unknowable evil, tentacles ahoy, and it comes through this portal to Earth, and that is what Jasbo is going to have to fight. Before talking about that fight, I just wanted to say about the actual reference. So Gibonenose is the name of a book that was published in the 1800s by a Western author that basically draws on a lot of indigenous folklore, but it kind of takes it's a very anti-Native American book. So it's a very racist book, essentially, that positions Native Americans as savages and sort of, bad people. And there's a lot of, it's of that era of Los the Mohicans and stuff like that, but it kind of goes in the opposite direction to that and says, no, there's no nobility here. This is just savagery.
If it was written in the 18th century, by a white man, I'm not surprised. That would be the perceived interpretation Obviously, at the time, obviously completely terrible, but
it's called Nick of the Woods, and then Jibaneno Say is like the subtitle, and it's about like a white man whose family were massacred, and to get revenge, he kind of stalks through the forest and becomes this kind of evil boogeyman kind of character.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I think there's no way Kim Newman is not pointing at that story on purpose. Like the reason that this character, this creature, has that name, I think, is to directly tie to, what we just talked about with Hawk and with the Native American people and what was sort of being explored there. And I think that's super interesting. It's like very, very subtle because I did not know about this book. I only found out from Googling it after reading this story because I wanted to know what that name meant. Where did it come from?
In 1990, you couldn't have Googled that.
You wouldn't have been able to. So obviously Kim Newman knows what he's doing, and I think there's definitely a power to it, and there's an intention to it, and I think there's a certain amount of success from it. It's maybe too subtle and too buried in the references on this one, but
I suppose at its most raw form, it's given a really unique, cool name that's believable to something.
Sure. Yeah.
That's evil. Yeah. And it's a name of someone who was clearly evil in that other story.
Yeah.
So in the very basic level, that it kind of works, doesn't it?
It does. It does work. Yeah.
And I'm guessing, I wonder if it was a kind of, well, you got Jabberwocky kind of, it's kind of that style
it's
of
in that space,
word.
For sure.
It's in that. Well, it's both a long word begins with J, but it's kind of that kind of works, and there's a connection. Brilliant! What a great name for it. I mean, it's a rock band name as well, isn't it? It's fun. so cool. I didn't know that. I didn't even think to Google it. I just assumed he'd made it up. So
I mean, and it's interesting. There's another. So when the Jibaneno Say is being summoned, and sort of when Ottokar is arriving at it happens in parallel as Ottokar is arriving at the so Dr. Proctor is arriving to take on Jasbo. You actually get this really cool montage around the world of different characters, and some characters we've met before as well in previous stories, almost experiencing the moment that the entire Earth is kind of put at risk. So that's when you get earthquakes and tsunamis and people realizing something's changed in the air. And I thought that was a really effective montage of sequence. It's just really good. And it makes the world
some
feel
funny
really
bits as well. Like Oliver North and Boris Yeltsin arguing about whether they should stand down a nuclear war. Is quite amusing. But you do visit the Pope and talking about Chantal and getting her on the job. So there's that kind of overlaying with the stories we've already been told, which is really cool as well.
Yeah. That's right.
You can see the timelines kind of mismatch, can't you?
That's right. Because the short story, the Route 66 story, is something like, well, it's a number of years, like 5 years earlier. This story obviously runs you right the way through to, I think, around 1998, 99, something like that, the precipice of the new millennium. And then the first book in the actual cycle, Demon Download, takes place at the very end of this story. So we we cover a huge amount of time that ties together the two stories we've already had, the short story and the full novel. So just having those moments that reference back, and we see Chantal, we get a bit of Trooper Stack, we get some of his love interest who died at the very start of Demon Download. So there's like things, you get little moments that do say it's a bigger world, there's other stuff happening. You've seen some of these events, you're gonna see some more. That's really effective as well.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. Yeah, so it's a bigger world, but then also these characters if you read the previous book. So it also means it feels smaller as well, more intimate, because you can see their lives interlaced and things, and it's which I think really helps with the potential payoff of what we've got to come.
Yeah, I agree.
Because that little bit was really important to really link it to what I hope, I haven't read it, but what feels like the progression into the next book.
Yeah. And then when this creature, this sort of many tentacled ancient elder god from space sort of arrives at this chapel where Jasbo has been hiding out with Hawk and with Dr. Proctor. There's then a sort of very kind of metaphysical battle of minds and wills, and it's quite an unusual sequence, I would say. How did you feel about this one?
The actual final battle, I don't know. If anything, that's probably, I think, the weakest part of the story. I don't know what I expected from a final battle scene, because it's quite hard when it's all magic, really. It's even harder to describe a magic battle. I actually preferred the way the demon was kind of brought forth. We haven't touched on that, but we've got Elder Seth and Darok there, and you've got all these basically his priests that are having to commit suicide to be in different ways as well. Some are shooting themselves and things to kind of perform effectively become the different tentacles of this demon, and then they don't want to, but they also know they've got no choice. And I thought that scene was really well done, like visceral and gross, but it's very
horror.
Cool. Good horror. Yeah. Again, Stephen King style thing. It's that real kind of, but the final battle, I don't know. It's nothing wrong with it, but it just didn't feel, I don't know how because it's all magical power. It's kind of, I don't know. It's hard to describe even now what happened. It just felt,
it's
maybe it's just
the
kind of things I engage with. I kind of, my brain maybe glosses over it a little bit.
I struggled with this a little bit as well, and I agree. It's probably the weakest portion of the book for me. And to use a cinematic parallel, I would say that anybody who's seen the Ang Lee version of Hulk, so Eric Bana, a number of years back, the end of that film is essentially Hulk versus a kind of metamorphosing kind of energy creature that can be clouds or a lake or lightning. So there's kind of this very, you get these incredibly dramatic, startling visuals of Hulk wrestling lightning and mist and whatever, but it's also it's almost harder to pass what's really who's winning. How do you know what's like? Is Hulk doing well because he's punching a lake? You don't really know. So you kind of got a bit of that. I mean, there's almost as well this kind of, I guess, an anime kind of going Super Saiyan mode moment where Jasbo kind of almost punches through into the sky and rockets into this like jellyfish like god that's sort of there. It's less tangible. It's kind of hard to follow the sort of specifics of the action. There was quite cool stuff. There's moments where like this god just picks up psychically, picks up all of the sand and all of the debris and everything that's not nailed down in this chapel. Like all of it just is raised up. And then because Dr. Proctor and Hawk that settles are in the midst of that, they're kind of just floating in the sand, in the sky. And there's a peril there. And at one point they drop and they just fall to the ground. There's an amazing sequence where Hawk, he lands and then the rain of sand is coming down and he has to be climbing through falling rain. Otherwise, he's going to get buried underneath. And that was really good. So things like that, the sort of tangible physical stuff makes...
Because you could imagine it.
Yes, because I was there. I could feel it. Yeah, whereas the sort of less tangible stuff kind of eluded me a little bit.
Yeah, you almost need to see it to be able to
kind of, yeah.
It would work better in an actual film, whereas... Yeah, I think that's what it wasn't bad at all.
No, it wasn't bad.
Was a little bit vague, and again, it's because it's probably very hard to write and hard to imagine exactly what the author has in mind at that point.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably it. But yeah, ultimately we get to the point where Jasbo wins, or Krokodil, as she's now sort of rechristened herself. She's merged with this sort of entity, the of myth and legend that lived in the moon. That's now possessed Jasbo, but then she's sort of found a compromise with it. It hasn't taken her over and possessed her completely. She is still in there, and together the two have become Krokodil. This, sort of a third thing. They've evolved together into something else, and that's kind of where we leave her story there. So we get to, they've saved the world. Elder Seth's initial plans to have Jasbo, Krokodil, Frankenstein's daughter, and every other name that she's known as, like those attempts to have her killed have failed. She has teamed up with Hawk that settles. She has learned more about herself and joined with Crocodile, and she's become this sort of new entity, this sort of new defender of the world. So that's kind of where the story ends. Dr. Proctor runs off into the sand. There is a moment we get where almost a spiritual Lone Ranger, he is described as, turns up and helps Hawk and sort of saves him at one point. We've seen him before. He helped Nathan Stack in Demon Download. So there's a load of threads that are left loose, but the story of how Jazzbo becomes Crocodile kind of ends there, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, he does. And you get that moment where Elder Seth says, "We've lost," and then he's not long afterwards, actually, no, we haven't. We've that way. The real big bads are a little bit annoyed, but they're more annoyed with the Jibaneo say than they are with us. So we got another chance. We got another chance. Apparently, there's going to be another book.
Yeah, and then because that would be then the inciting incident for them creating the virus demon that then is in Demon Download. So we catch up with that moment where Duroc and Elder Seth say, "Let's download a demon into the internet instead." And that's when Chantal goes on her mission. So yeah, it sort of works really well and kind of brings everything together there. There were a couple of points that I didn't mention. So there's one which is a bit of intertextuality that I absolutely adore. It's essentially a throwaway reference, and it doesn't do much in this book, but I loved it. And that was that Elder Seth at one point kind of goes on a vision quest. So he's comatose for a brief period, and he then sees alternative universes. It's a sort of almost a Michael Moorcock Eternal Champion kind of thing, where he sort of exists in many different times and places and alternative lands. One of those is described as Elder Seth was a fearsome sorcerer rotting behind a mask in a 7-turreted castle at the edge of a great empire, doing battle with swordsmen, magicians, and a leech lady. So it's canonical, I think it's safe to say, that Elder Seth from the Dark Future universe is Drachenfels from the Warhammer Fantasy universe. That's great. I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, it's good fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. Good fun. And once again, that means that Jason Voorhees exists in a multiverse with Warhammer. Which that's great.
I think you should get it. I'm sure we can get a 3D file of Jason Voorhees, stick him on a square base, and you can play the Warhammer world and say, "Get that book out." If someone says, "What? You can't have him in here, mate." Sorry, he's not. I think you're fine.
Yeah, he's directly connected to this universe. It's totally fine. I must admit, I did wonder, just to go back to the Voorhees and the Michael Myers piece, whether or not that was like legally sanctioned. Did they get the IP approval to put those names?
No, of course they didn't. I
can't imagine they would have.
I don't think it matters. I don't think they do it now because they'd be a lot more careful with it.
Yeah,
and they wouldn't want to mix IPs now anyway. We've
had
discussions around IPs this week already, haven't we? Have a messenger, but I don't think they would do that now anyway. But I also don't think they broke any rules there, because I think with pop culture reference, I think you can get away with it in literature.
Okay.
I think if you were if you were making something that was visual, so if you made a film of it and they looked like them, that might be a problem. But I think in terms of a story using a name, and
I guess that would be how you can do your Ready Player One. I think you
get away with it. Yeah, I think I might be wrong. I don't know where I'm getting this information from. I'm just making it up, but it feels like it feels like if you write something in a story, it's in a novel, it's just written word. That I think that the rules are slightly different in terms of it. I don't know. It might be wrong.
Yeah,
might be completely wrong.
It also, of course, means that Kim Newman canonically exists in the same multiverse as Drachenfels, and Kim Newman exists in our world. So that means that Drachenfels does exist.
Yeah.
So that's just something to bear in mind.
Just watch out for 7 tower castles.
But yeah, I thought that was really fun. And then I guess we should tackle the prophecy. So there's a number of different characters who are referenced in a sort of prophetic language. So I've got them written down somewhere. Let me just grab them. Should have been better prepared and had them to hand. Okay, so we've got the one-eyed white girl who is Crocodile.
Yeah, you'd imagine
she's got
so.
a cybernetic eye. The holy woman from across the great water.
Probably Chantal.
Chantal, yeah, because she's a nun and she's from Europe and she's come over to fight evil. There is the man with music in his heart.
It's going to be Elvis, isn't it?
One assumes it's going to be Elvis, right? But we haven't actually. He's been referenced. We haven't seen him yet in the stories. We know he's in them because he's on the cover of one of the books. We've not seen him yet. Then there is the red-handed one. Now, this is interesting. There's some discussion in the Patreon book club that I did about whether or not this was Red Harvest. So, Red Harvest being a sanctioned op, she's mentioned a couple of times in this book. She's in lots of the wider lore. She's in the Dark Future rule book. She's in all the original press, like the promotional materials. She's, technically speaking, a good guy because she's one of the bounty hunters who works for the corporations. In this book in particular, though, she's referred to many times as being quite, not aggressive necessarily, but merciless, I suppose, would be the phrase. And there's even a moment when Jazbo is being described as the most dangerous woman in America, and Red Harvest says that, well, she's the second most dangerous because I'm the most dangerous, essentially. So
I mean, it could be her. I suppose the connection is red.
Is red, but also the red-handed one kind of speaks to someone who's kind of brutal and merciless, and we're given that impression, I think, of Red Harvest in this story.
I think so. It'd be interesting. It could be something completely. The others seem a lot more.
It could be someone else.
Whereas this could be something else. But yeah, it could well be. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I think that would work. Yellow Legs, who has lost much. So the thinking here is that this would be Nathan Stack because of his uniform. He's got the yellow and blue US Cav uniform.
Yes, and that definitely makes sense, especially as we've seen him saved.
Yeah, and he lost. And it's referred to again in this book, but we know that he lost the woman that he loved.
Yeah,
in Demon Download at the very start.
Yeah, that definitely seems right.
The man who rides alone. So this feels like probably it would be the mysterious Lone Ranger.
Yeah, I was going to say he's got to be. It'd be very strange for him not to be one of the prophecies. So yeah, I would say so.
I do wonder if we're going to find out, because this is interesting, because it can't be a John Wayne, because John Wayne is talked about in the books, and you wouldn't have Elvis turn up as like a special agent and then have John Wayne turn up as well. But I did wonder if this is going to turn out to be a character that's familiar to us in another.
It could be Clint Eastwood or something, couldn't it?
Yeah, could it be someone like that? You know, who sort of embodies some of the roles they played? Maybe, I don't know, because it does feel like there's got to be another shoe to drop with this mysterious.
I hope it's not Zorro, because that
could be Zorro. Could be. It could be. I'd take it. I think that would be great. Like an aging Zorro in the Dark Future universe. Oh, I would be all over that. That would be fantastic. I hope it is now. And then there is also the Great Father in White. So
he's been in it, isn't he? So
I wondered if this possibly could. I mean, the Pope has been in it, so it could be the Pope. Although it feels weird that you would have Chantal, who works for the Pope, and the Pope both be in it. I wondered if it could be Dr. Zarathustra, because he, a white coat, he's a doctor.
Referenced a lot as well. You
kind
of want to meet him, don't you?
So. Yeah, and he is the father of Gentech, such as like the biotechnologies.
He's also inherently evil. That's the impression.
He's a bad guy. Yeah,
I mean, there's the reference that they talked about his references to Nazi Germany, don't they? And connections.
Yes, in this book they do. Yeah,
you're almost thinking, oh, you know, I don't know. For me, it felt like the implication was he knows Mengele, that kind of.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't. Does he fit in with that kind of?
Well, no. But then
axis of good.
I will admit to a preference here. So I very much love when you get like a reformed villain, or even not a reformed villain, but a villain who has no other choice but to, you know, when Lex Luthor has to team up with the Justice League to fight off Darkseid, and for one mission, he will be on the team, and everybody hates him, and he hates being there, but he also helps save the day. I love that kind of moral complexity, so I'm a big fan of that. So that's why I was thinking,
unless it's Ottokar.
Then Ottokar is the other, because he's also a doctor, right?
Doctor, yeah. Do we know what he's a doctor of? Was he a medical doctor? Did I miss that?
Economics, maybe?
Yeah, you'd imagine so. So probably not wearing a white coat. But judging by some of the economic advice, maybe he wasn't. Doesn't have a doctor in economics.
We didn't mention that, actually, but because Ottokar talks about some of the fact that he's been giving economic advice to the president for some time, and he admits that he's just made it up.
Making it up.
So all of his policies and the budget and the approach that's been taken by President North over however many years is literally just Ottokar having fun and just coming up with nonsense. And I think
crazy powerful political advisors just going off on one on their own. Would never happen. I don't know what you're on about.
Which, it's very on the nose satire, but I'm here for it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good.
Next, you'll be telling me he's testing his eyesight by driving or something. I don't know.
So yeah, I thought that was fun. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think that this was great fun. I think it, again, the pace and just the joy of reading it. It's not something we've had with every GW book. I think, you know, there are some that have been a bit, I don't think any of them have been a major slog, but some of them have been maybe harder to keep turning the pages, and certainly turning the pages, looking forward to turning the pages. Whereas
that excited to kind of keep reading and pick it up again. And this this doesn't have that problem at all.
No, and I think all of the Jack Yeovil work that we've read so far, so Kim Newman's Jack Yeovil books, they've all been they've been page turners in the literal sense. Yeah,
totally. It just makes me wish I read more of his stuff.
I'm really looking forward to it. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to read Anno Dracula. So I was given a copy of Anno Dracula for my birthday. I'm very much looking forward to it. Whether or not I'm going to wait until we've finished the Vampire Genevieve stories before I do so, I don't know yet. But I'm really eager to give it a read. Yeah, but yeah,
maybe I've never read it myself. Maybe
we
could finish the series and both do it and discuss it.
Let's just keep adding book club episodes. Let's just have GW Books Club. I mean, if we could do an episode every day, Stu, I would, because it would be good. So, are you going to give Krokodil Tears a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Absolutely, yeah, it's really good. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
Same for me. Yeah, very much thumbs up. I think it's high on my list of all the GW books so far. I think it continues as well, and it's a bittersweet aspect to this. The Demon download cycle and the wider Dark Future universe that's talked about in these books is great, and I would love to see more material in it. But we know that there's only these books, really, because the game barely scratches the surface on this wider world building. It has the foundations, but there's so much more depth in these books. And we also know that the end of the Demon download cycle was never written. So we're a book short on the cycle, which is going to be rough, I think, when we get there. If they hold up at this kind of caliber,
so what we need, because GW are never going to re-release it. That's not one that they will do as a nostalgia thing. But surely there exists a world where Crucible 7 could go, that role-play game
Cubicle
you never
7,
did.
Yeah.
Cubicle 7, Crucible 4. Cubicle. They could pitch that, couldn't they? And
they certainly
could.
Do
the role-play game.
I'd love to see
the role-play game. You could get that final novel, maybe.
I think the issue we've got with that is that James Wallace has confirmed that Hog's Head Publishing, when they were doing the first edition of, they took over the first edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So in the mid 90s, they wanted to publish a Dark Future RPG. I think if they'd done that then, even though it's a few years after, Dark Future still would have been warm enough to revive it. If you were to do, even in the unlikely event that that were to happen and Dark Future was brought back as a role-playing game now, it's such a product of the 80s and the early 90s. It's so tied to that time.
True. Yeah,
I think you'd really struggle to capture it. Yeah,
you'd have to reskin it, wouldn't you? And would you lose all of the?
I think you would.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's enough going on in the modern world that you could very easily redo it, couldn't you?
You could, but it would be something different. It would be slightly different, and I think
it would be, but I think it would still work.
It definitely could work for sure. But this iteration, this version,
in fact, I think it would be very fun. I think there's a lot. If you look at the kind of things that Kim Newman drew on, I think it could be, but it would probably.
You'd have to rename
it to that. Yeah.
If you're going to reboot it,
you can call it Dark Future, but you have a subtitle.
Future, maybe.
You don't.
Because it's the darker future than even Kim Newman could have imagined. Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to see it. Well, I think they should go do that. I think they should go and pitch it and do it.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. Well,
maybe you should write it, John.
I'd be more than happy to if someone gives me a call and wants to commission it. Let's do it. But for now, I think we'll have to leave it there. Next time, we're going to be back talking about a Warhammer Fantasy novel again. It's going to be Storm Warriors by Brian Craig. It's the last story in the Orfeo trilogy. So, quite exciting. Go back and watch our Orfeo-related videos. We've done Zaragoz and Plague Demon if you want to find out more about how we feel about some of these. Not a total loss, I don't think. I think there's been some good stuff in there, but definitely they've been a divisive set of books. Certainly, we've had some qualms with some of it. On the live stream discussions that I do with my patrons, very divisive. The Brian Craig story is lots of opinions. So Storm Warriors, I think, is going to be an interesting one. Can it rise above where the Conrad trilogy has taken us? It's definitely a bit of a gamble.
I'm looking forward to finding out. That's
it. Stu, where can people find you on the internet?
Miniature Realms, YouTube, Miniature Realms, Instagram, X, Facebook, Miniature Realms. It's all the same, but yeah.
Great
Miniature Realms.
And if you want, you can check all of those links down in the description below, as well as your Patreon, your Discord, all that sort of good stuff. And I'm Jordan Sorcery. I'm Jordan Sorcery on everything. My Patreon, my links are down there as well. So until next time, when it's Storm Warriors o'clock, that is going to be everything from us for the GW Books Club. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.